Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'm reading American Trade Unionism by William Z. Foster. This is Chapter 12, Business Unionism. In many, if not most industries, employers sought to achieve their program by the traditional method of destroying all unionism among their workers. But in many important cases, their tendency was to develop a maze of class collaboration arrangements which concentrated themselves around company unionism in the shops and employee stock ownership schemes in the realms of finance. It is these new tendencies which we must examine here. Company unionism. About 1913, many American employers, under the lead of the Rockefeller interests, departing from the traditional 100% open shop policy of no organizations among their workers, began to establish company unions. Their program was to break the trade unions and to build company unions. Since then, especially during the war period, the company union movement has spread rapidly. Under a maze of forms, a recent survey showed 214 types among the existing 814 company unions. It has been established in many key and basic industries, including steel, railroad, textile, oil, lumber, packing, electrical, etc. It encompasses over 1 million workers, largely in such great plants as the Bethlehem Steel Company, Pacific Textile Mills, Pennsylvania Railroad, Westinghouse Electric Company, Elgin Watch Company, International Harvester Company, Western Union Telegraph Company, Eastman Kodak Company, etc. A list of the firms having company unions contains many of the greatest capitalist concerns in America. In connection with the company union movement, either as direct parts of it or as related institutions, these employers usually have a whole array of welfare plans and programs, covering group insurance, old age pensions, sick benefits, housing schemes, education, sports, etc. A prime purpose of the company union movement, with its welfare attachments, is to speed up the workers. Recently, a production engineer said that the great industrial efficiency expert, Taylor, had failed to understand that it was necessary not only to develop the technical methods of efficiency in production, but also to secure workers' cooperation in their application. The company unions are designed to secure such cooperation, and undoubtedly in some instances they partially achieve this purpose. Their proceedings are saturated with propaganda and actions calculated to speed up the workers. Employee stock ownership. A twin brother to company unionism, making for the weakening of the workers' opposition, ideologically and organizationally, to capitalist exploitation, is the many-phased movement of the employers to assemble and control what monies the workers are able to save out of their meager wages. These workers' savings they concentrate in bank deposits, life insurance, etc., but the most significant aspect of the movement is their stimulation of the workers to purchase stock in various industrial enterprises. Within recent years, this stock-buying movement, under forced draft from the various corporations, has been widely extended. Reformist defenders of capitalism pounce upon this and declare that the workers are becoming capitalists and are buying control of the industries. At the head of these enthusiasts stands Thomas Nixon Carver, professor of political economy at Harvard, with his recent book, The Present Economic Revolution in the United States. A few quotations from this work illustrates the lavish way these economists ascribe billions of dollars and far-reaching industrial control to the workers. The only economic revolution now underway is going on in the United States. It is a revolution that is to wipe out the distinction between laborers and capitalists by making laborers their own capitalists and by compelling the capitalists to become laborers of one kind or another. Page 9. These are at least 3 kinds of evidence that indicate roughly the extent to which laborers are becoming capitalists. First, the rapid growth of savings deposits. Second, the investment by laborers in the shares of corporations. Third, the growth of labor banks. Page 11. The saving power of American working men is so great that, if they would save and carefully invest their savings, in 10 years they would be one of the dominating financial powers of the world. Page 118. Carver's utopia glitters, but it is only dross. It cannot and will not work. The workers are not buying the industries, nor are they becoming capitalists. For one thing, a very large percentage of those listed as employees in Carver's calculations are company officials, who notoriously invest their savings in stocks of the concerns for which they work. Thus, if the U.S. Steel reports 47,647 stockholders out of about 250,000 employees, it is safe to assume that the overwhelming mass of them are company officials, white-collar elements, and the upper layers of skilled workers. The masses of workers are little touched by the movement, despite 20 years of active stock selling by the corporation. Boosters of employee stockholding grossly exaggerate both the number of such stockholders and the extent of their ownings. Thus, W. Jet Locke says, altogether the holdings of 6,500,000 employee stockholders amount to only $500 million, showing labor has made an absolute but not relative gain in corporate ownership. This number of employee stockholders is ridiculously exaggerated. The total number of all stockholders in the United States, discounting duplications according to U.S. figures, is 2,358,000, and of these hardly more than 500,000 can be classified as employees. But if Locke were correct, it would represent a holding of only about $75 apiece, which does not seem a very capitalistic figure. The Federal Trade Commission report on national wealth and income based on 1922 figures shows that only 75 out of 1,000 stockholders are employees, and that these own the even smaller percentage of only 15 shares out of each 1,000. Of the total stockholders, 53.5% receive only 4% of all dividends paid, and Professor Carver's own figures in the case of many big corporations indicate clearly that the big stock owners are increasing their holdings at a manifold more rapid ratio than are the employee stockholders. Nevertheless, the illusions growing out of such propaganda as Carver's are dangerous. Undoubtedly, many sections of American skilled workers have been corrupted and bourgeoisified, and some isolated sections of the unskilled and semi-skilled, Ford plants, Philadelphia Rapid Transit, etc., have been somewhat affected by American imperialism through high wages and other concessions. But the lesser skilled do not share this prosperity. They are living from hand to mouth. The mass of the workers cannot buy actual control of or even heavy interests in corporation stocks, not even if they are forced to buy such stocks. The workers have not got the money. Their wages are too low. In Current History, March 1927, Mino Weisenberg says, in 1923 and 1924, the real wages of unskilled workers were only 20% higher than the 1913 average, which was then considered insufficient for a decent living standard. U.S. Department of Labor statistics show that the average wages for male adult workers in the United States do not exceed $30 per week. To speak of workers so underpaid finding a solution of their economic problems by buying the industries with their savings is ridiculous. And what about periods of industrial depression when unemployed workers are forced to draw upon their scanty reserves? Mr. Carver blithely assumes that the present prosperity will continue or even increase. This is a fallacy. Inevitably, the United States, despite its present economic strength, will be undermined by the contradictions inherent in world capitalism and plunged into recurring deeper industrial crises. At present, capitalism in all important industrial countries, in order to extricate itself from its deep difficulties, is making frenzied efforts to speed up production, by the wholesale introduction of machinery and new processes, and by driving the workers still faster. This is the so-called rationalization of industry movement. Its effects are enormously to increase population. In the United States, since 1919, the output per worker in industry has increased 40%. In 1925, with 385,000 less workers than in 1923, who worked for $270 million less in wages, $1 billion more was added to the value of manufactured goods. The rationalization movement leads inevitably to a sharpening of class antagonisms at home and to an intensified struggle for the world market. Mass unemployment is an inseparable result of it. Germany, with its intense rationalization of industry, illustrates this strikingly. There, wages are at a minimum, the working day has been lengthened to 9, 10, 12 hours, and chronic mass unemployment prevails. The United States, because of its favorable position, escapes for the moment the full harmful effects of the movement. But certain it is that in the near future, far-reaching industrial crises and unemployment on a gigantic scale will confront the American working class. Then, not only will stock buying cease, but the workers who have stocks will tend to get rid of them. They will then be gobbled up for a song by the big capitalists. Significant is the fact that during the crisis of 1921 to 22, the percentage of U.S. steel employees holding stock fell from 42% to 16%. Undoubtedly, the next industrial crisis will knock the bottom out of the employee stock ownership movement. The workers, with such stock purchases as they are making, are not buying their way into control of the industries, despite the isolated instances of the Philadelphia Rapid Transit Company, where the employees own about 1/3 of the common stock, and the A. Nash Company of Cincinnati, where they actually own a majority. Big capital, which is rapidly concentrating and organizing itself, is not weakened by the extension of petty capitalist holdings. In his book Imperialism, the Highest Stages of Capitalism, Lenin, in dealing with the power of big capital to dominate petty capital, says, "The democratization of the ownership of shares, from which the bourgeois sophists and opportunist would-be social democrats expect, the democratization of capital, the strengthening of the role and significance of small-scale production, etc., is in fact one of the ways of increasing the power of financial oligarchy." Page 49. The big capitalists are finding ways and means to control the capital being assembled by the employee ownership movement and to turn it to their own advantage. W. Jet Lauk says, "The extent of employee ownership of stock has increased, but the degree of control exercised by employees is very small. Various barriers are raised by the capitalist against employees exercising any degree of control through such stock as they may purchase. They often confine stock sales to trusted ranks of employees, as for example the Bell Telephone Company, which sells stock to only 5% of its employees. In many cases, the amounts of stock per employee are also limited, as with the Consolidated Gas Company of New York, which does not permit its employees to secure more than 20 shares each of $50 value. Corporations often control blocks of employee-owned stock through their officials, who are also employees. The discharge power also rests in their hands with which to terrorize refractory worker stockholders, if necessary. The vast funds in the insurance and building loan associations, whose billions Mr. Carver would have the workers invest in stocks in their own behalf, quote, any day they see fit, are of course safely in the hands of the capitalist bankers. Carverism, supported by a widespread propaganda in the capitalist press, undoubtedly cultivates dangerous illusions among the workers, even though the masses can buy no stocks. These illusions must be vigorously combated. The whole movement works out to the benefit of the capitalists by, on the one hand, giving them greater financial control and, on the other, by tending to confuse the workers and to weaken their organizations and struggles. In the early stages of the company union and employee stock ownership movements, the trade union leaders, despite their general tendencies towards class collaboration in all its forms, gave considerable opposition to these movements. They denounced company unionism vociferously and, to some extent, actually fought against it. Even as late as October 1925, William Green, patterning after a previously published article in the September 1925 Workers' Monthly, organ of the Workers' Communist Party, demanded that the workers capture the company unions and make them points of departure for movements to start real unions. This piece of copying the nation dubbed "taking a leaf out of the book" of the left wing. The union leaders also, on many occasions, sharply condemned the practice of the workers buying stocks in capitalist industry. They still place some reliance in the strike and the power of the unions as such. But following the loss of the 1922 strike of the railroad shopmen, a radical change set in among the union leaders. Their new orientation, manifested by new and intensified forms of class collaboration, constitutes in reality a great surrender of the workers' interests by an acceptance of the employer's general programs of company unionism and employee stock ownership. This acceptance takes the forms principally, in addition to its more political aspects which will be discussed later, of the company unionization of the trade unions and the establishment of trade union capitalism. Company unionizing the trade unions. In pressing for a docile working class, speeded in production to the limit, and controlled by the employer's agents, the capitalists are proceeding along two general routes, both leading to the same goal. They are not only organizing company unions directly out of the unorganized masses, but they are also systematically degenerating the trade unions in the direction of company unionism, when they do not smash them altogether. In this latter course, they have the assistance of the reactionary labor bureaucracy. Undoubtedly, the employers are proceeding consciously to the company unionization of the trade unions. Many capitalist apologists are actually proposing the organizational as well as the functional consolidation of company unions and trade unions. In his recent book, Political and Industrial Democracy, W. Jet Lauk, bourgeois economist, says, "It cannot be denied that shop committees and more extensive systems of employee representation are of fundamental importance, but they should be coordinated with regular unions. Not only industrial democracy and the cooperative spirit in industry will be thus better realized, but the greatest measure of efficiency and productiveness in industry attained. Cooperative relations between employers and employees can never be realized permanently by shop committees or systems of employee representation unless the labor union is adopted as the fundamental basis of procedure, pages 82 to 84. As we shall see, the trade union leaders have already proceeded far toward the functional amalgamation of company unionism under the stimulus of the employers, nor will they hesitate before a possible organizational amalgamation unless checked by rank-and-file resistance. The Boot and Shoe Workers Union, now only a shade better than a company union, shows how far the leaders will go towards company unionism unless blocked by the workers' resistance. The Baltimore and Ohio Plan. Speed up and no strikes. That is the demand of the employers upon their workers in this era of American world imperialism. That is the road to company unionization. The railroad union leaders, convinced after the loss of the 1922 shopmen's strike that they could not make even formal resistance to the powerful companies, were the first to surrender completely to this demand. They adopted as their working principle cooperation with the employers in production. They elaborated the B&O Plan. It was worked out by Otto S. Bayer, an efficiency engineer, and sponsored by William H. Johnston, former president of the International Association of Machinists. Johnson says of it, "The idea underlying our service to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad may be compared to the idea which underlies the engineering services extended to railroads by large corporations to furnish, let us say, arch brick, superheaters, stokers, or lubricating oils. The union members furnish their services to the best advantage of all. In response of the recognition accorded the union and by virtue of the agreement existing between the management and us, it becomes peculiarly feasible for us to take steps between management and men and create, as it were, an all-pervading collective will for the major purposes of railroading, namely, efficient service to the public, a fair return to the investors, and adequate wages and steady employment for the workers. The legitimate, standard, genuine unions of the railroad shop mechanics are more than eager to offer the same positive cooperation to any railroad management which is intelligent enough and courageous enough to see the inevitable logic of events. I maintain that such a management would never again desire to see the affiliated shop unions effaced from its railroad. The B&O Plan involves abandoning all struggle against the employers," says F.J. Cullum, a union official on the Canadian National Railways. "It is absolutely essential that there should be complete harmony among the members of the committee, B&O Plan. There should be at no time a feeling that they belong to different groups, neither that one shall seek an advantage over the other. Railroad workers are already intensely exploited," says Leland Olds in a recent Federated Press article. According to W.H. Dunlap in the monthly reviews of the U.S. Department of Labor, the productive output of railroad labor in the United States has increased about 40% since 1915, and about 150% since 1890. The increased productivity of railroad labor since 1920 is reflected in a drop of about 275,000, or 13.5% in the number of workers employed. The B&O Plan facilitates the increasing exploitation. The employers quite generally greeted it. After its adoption by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, it was installed upon the Chesapeake and Ohio, Chicago, Milwaukee and St. Paul, Chicago and Northwestern, Canadian National Railways, etc. It has also been introduced into various metal trades and contract shops. Under the B&O Plan, the union officials helped the employers to drive the workers. Recently on the Canadian National Railways at Winnipeg, they presented the company to be laid off a list of men, some with from 12 to 17 years experience, because they did not cooperate with the company. The B&O Plan has proved profitable for the employers. In 45 shops of the B&ORR, according to a recent report, 18,000 efficiency suggestions were made by the men, of which 15,000 were accepted. Dividends of the B&O Company amounted to 17% for 1926, or almost double as much as in 1924. Cooperation of the workers with the employers in speeding up production was a big factor in producing these high dividends. No wonder that Willard, president of the road, glowingly endorsed the B&O Plan in a recent speech before the National Civic Federation. As for the workers, they have had their pains for their trouble. They receive less for their work, by from 4 to 6 cents per hour, than the shop workers employed on the non-union Pennsylvania Railroad. The ruinous effects of this intensive class collaboration policy of the railroad trade union leadership is exemplified by the Watson-Parker Law, lately adopted by Congress for the purpose of regulating wages and working conditions on the railroads. This law, undoubtedly the most vicious piece of anti-labor legislation enacted for many years, proceeds far towards the company unionization of the railroad unions. It emanates from the big railroad companies, the notorious union crusher Atterbury of the Pennsylvania being its outstanding advocate. But it was enacted into law with the full support of the railroad union officialdom and the higher bureaucracy of the AFL. The Watson-Parker Law crystallizes the employer's program for hamstringing the railroad unions. It incorporates, with official labor's endorsement, many anti-labor features long bitterly resisted by the trade union movement. It virtually illegalizes strikes on the railroads and establishes compulsory arbitration. It opens the door wide to the development of company unions. It gives the reactionary federal courts the right to interfere in and regulate wage disputes between the railroad workers and the railroad companies. It cements the alliance, disastrous for the workers, between the companies and the union leadership, an alliance based on the surrender of the workers' interests. The Watson's-Parker Law registers the lowest point reached by American trade unions in their degeneration, brought about by joint action of the employers and reactionary union leaders towards company unionism. The new wage policy. The interests of the imperialistic employers demand the most intense possible exploitation of the workers. The reactionary union leaders, chastened by the general defeat of the trade unions in the years 1919 to 23, and in their true role as agents of the bourgeoisie in the ranks of the workers, yield to this demand and make haste to help the employers drive the workers at ever greater speed. Traces of this eventual development, now definitely crystallized under the name of the New Wage Policy, were already to be found in the Portland Convention in 1923. The 1924 convention of the AFL in El Paso specifically endorsed the B&O plan, and the 1925 convention in Atlantic City elaborated its underlying principle of cooperation with the employers to increase production into the fundamental policy of the official labor movement. The essence of the new wage policy, as stated by the AFL in 1925, is as follows. We hold that the best interests of wage earners as well as the whole social group are served by increasing production in quality as well as quantity, and by high wage standards which assure sustained purchasing power to the workers and therefore higher national standards for the environment in which they live and the means to enjoy cultured opportunities. We declare that wage reductions produce industrial and social unrest and that low wages are not conducive to low production costs. We urge upon wage earners everywhere that we oppose all wage reductions and that we urge upon management the elimination of wastes in production in order that selling prices may be lower and wages higher. Social inequality, industrial instability, and injustice must increase unless the workers' real wages, the purchasing power of their wages, coupled with the continuing reduction of the number of hours making up the working day, are progressed in proportion to man's increasing power of production. Some hailed this last paragraph as a radical advance for the AFL. In reality, considering the lackey-like official practices under the new wage policy, it is no more than a platonic argument in favor of higher wages in return for more production. The Atlantic City Convention, as a means of putting its new wage policy into effect, proposed a conference of organized labor, organized farmers, and trade associations under the direction of Secretary Hoover of the Department of Commerce. The purpose of the conference is to consider the elimination of difficulties preventing the constructive organization of industry. In the furtherance of this policy, the entire trade union leadership is carrying on an intensive propaganda. The union journalists reek with class collaboration cooperation. That handmaiden of the bureaucracy, the Workers' Education Bureau, also does its share. The two outstanding champions are Green and Wool. They offer, in all keys and tones, unstinted cooperation of the workers to intensify production, provided the employers will stop their union-smashing campaigns and permit the existence of degenerate unions. They especially claim that the employers can gain more in production through trade unions than through company unions. Their plan, in brief, is to scab the company unions out of existence. Trade unions are increasingly basing their agreements on the union management cooperation principles. In the anthracite coal regions, for example, this cooperation is being vigorously practiced. The employers are rapidly mechanizing the industry and are introducing the speed up under various forms. In this, they have the full support of the union officials. The conditions of the workers are sacrificed ruthlessly. Wide discontent prevails. But when this manifests itself openly, the workers are told by both company and union officials that it is all necessary in the good cause of efficiency and cooperation. The socialist trade union leaders are fully in harmony with this entire company unionization movement. In fact, they and the progressives were pioneers in outlining many features of it. They developed the B&O Plan and various phases of trade union capitalism. The extreme right wing has adopted it from them. Sidney Hillman, president of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, contributed to the development of this ultra-class collaboration. In the other needle trades, the socialist leaders followed the same general policy. The great fight now raging between rights and lefts in the garment industry centers about the general company unionization tendency, with the rights yielding to it and the left stoutly resisting it. For example, the recent cloakmakers strike in New York turned around the demand of the employers for the right to organize their shops. That is, the employers wanted to secure the right to arbitrarily discharge yearly 10% of their employees. In this demand, there is contained the whole company unionizing tendency. Its effects would inevitably be to speed up the workers, to weaken their militancy, and to undermine the union generally. The rights proposed to concede this demand, the lefts categorically rejected it. Hence the bitter strike, with the left supported by the masses on one side, and the rights, backed by the employers, the press, the police, and the whole AFL bureaucracy, on the other. With the help of their labor allies, the employers won the right of reorganization. The events in the needle industry epitomize the general struggle throughout the labor movement between the forces making for progress and those making for company unionization. The difference is that the needle workers are more advanced and better able to voice their opposition than workers in other industries. Besides, their industry is in deep crisis. Everywhere the union leaders, operating with the employers, are driving the workers faster in production, weakening their organization, and generally laying the basis for eventual broad class upheavals. Trade union capitalism. Through the B&O Plan and similar schemes, the union leaders are adopting the company unionization program of the employers, and through trade union capitalism, labor banking, investment corporations, trade union insurance companies, etc., they are accepting the whole program of employee stock ownership and the workers becoming capitalist theory behind it. Listen to the voice of Professor Carver coming from the mouths of labor leaders. The August 1925 Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers Journal says, "Labor banking is the only revolution in the world worth a peck of beans. Its colossal possibilities become apparent when one considers that the total wage bill of the country is approximately one-half of the $50 billion financial resources of our 31,000 banks, and that the farmers' annual crops equal in value about two-thirds of the remainder. Once let a majority of the workers and farmers of America learn to concentrate their savings and their credit power in their own banks, and they can control the resources of the world's richest nation within one generation. We set out with only one theory. That is the theory that in America there is no such thing as a working class as distinguished from a capitalist class. Men pass too readily from one group into the other to be tagged with class labels. It is the Brotherhood's aim in its financial enterprises to show its members and workers generally how they can become capitalists as well as workers. In such poisonous propaganda lies the real danger for the workers. This tendency is most clearly expressed by the BFLE officials, the outstanding and outspoken leaders of the trade union capitalism movement. Thus, for example, in combination with the National City Bank, subsidiary of the largest bank in America, they bought $3,500,000 worth of bonds in the International Great Northern R&R and sold them to their members. Said W.S. Stone of this deal, one of scores like it, "Ownership of a bond makes a man a creditor. We sold many of the Great Northern bonds to men employed on that railroad. Immediately, each became concerned with the first concern of a creditor for his debtor, the debtor's solvency. Bonds bring a sense of responsibility and of security. The labor banks, labor investment corporations, and trade union insurance companies amassing large funds must invest them. They do so by buying regular capitalist securities. This prepares the way for all illusions cultivated by Carver and such capitalist propagandists that the workers can buy the industries. It also tends to paralyze the struggle of stock-owning workers against the employers by creating a false notion among the workers that because they have a thin scattering of company stocks, they have interests in common with their employers. It poisons the labor movement with graft. The devastatingly destructive efforts of trade union capitalism upon the labor movement were amply demonstrated by the recent collapse of the BFLE financial enterprises, which has given the trade union capitalism movement a staggering, if not mortal, blow. Labor banking. Among American workers, especially the favored skilled trades, there are considerable numbers who, despite the average national weekly wage of only $30 for all categories of workers, manage to set aside certain amounts as savings from their wages. To some extent, these savings are the equivalent of the state unemployment, old age, sickness, and other insurance plans to be found in various European countries. Estimates vary as to how large is the aggregate of these savings annually. Guesses as to their amount range from several hundred million to several billions. Thus, Mr. Peter Brady, president of the Federation Labor Bank of New York, makes the following fantastic and manifestly grossly exaggerated estimate in his speech to the British Labour Congress. Each year, $27 billion is paid in wages to our industrial workers, and from $6 billion to $7 billion is saved in various ways. It is this huge sum which labor banks hope eventually to control. The employers awoke first to the existence of considerable amounts of worker savings, and they organized strings of small savings banks, stock selling schemes, etc., to get control of them for their own use. Now the trade union bureaucracy has learned of these funds and is proceeding to assemble them. This is the basis of trade union capitalism expressed by labor banks, investment corporations, life insurance companies, etc. The foundation of the whole structure is labor banking. At present, there are 36 labor banks in operation. Their resources aggregate well on to $150 million. Pioneers in this movement were the Trade Union Savings and Loan Bank of Seattle, 1918, and the Mount Vernon Bank established by the machinists in Washington in 1920. The labor banks are organized by single national unions or by groups of local unions of various trades. The railroad unions are the leaders in this movement. The B of LE owns 12 banks with total resources of over $50 million. The Federation Bank of New York has resources of about $12 million. Important links in the labor banking chain are the banks of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers and International Ladies Garment Workers Union in the needle trades. The labor banks, although widely advertising themselves as cooperative in character, are manifestly not genuine cooperatives. Even those that have fallen entirely into the hands of the capitalists still call themselves cooperatives. Control of the regular labor bank stock is in the hands of the reactionary bureaucrats at the head of the unions. The same rule applies to all the modern trade union capitalistic institutions. Thus, for example, 51% of the stock of the $10 million B of LE investment company is held by the union, which means by the already deeply entrenched reactionary upper leadership, while the rest is sold to the general membership and the public. These leaders, without check by the rank and file, use the bank funds to finance all sorts of capitalistic concerns, which they personally fatten upon. They are trade union capitalists. With the huge funds at their disposal, they are building up a monstrous bureaucracy by debauching democracy in the unions and are growing wealthy. Labor investment concerns. The labor bureaucrats, basing their activities upon the funds and general facilities of the labor banks, are organizing investment companies. These are all controlled by little cliques of leaders at the top of the unions who engage in the wildest speculations. There are 11 of such investment corporations with an aggregate paid-in capital of $34 million, besides a large number of separate enterprises including office buildings, apartment houses, coal mines, etc. There are two general types of institutions: A, those organized privately by little groups of high union officials, such as the Hobart Stone $250,000 mail-order house in Cleveland, and B, those established by these officials in the name of their unions, such as the Brotherhood Holding Company of the B of LE. The latter is the favorite form. It puts the full prestige of the unions behind the capitalistic enterprises, and it does not lay too many obstructions in the way of the trade union leaders milking these concerns for their own benefit. The Seattle labor movement during the war period took the initiative in this labor investment movement. Listman, Alt, and other local labor leaders organized a series of fly-by-night capitalistic concerns, such as United Finance, the Listman Service, Class A Theaters, Padilla Bay Reclamation Company, Deep Sea Salvage Company, consumer cooperatives, etc. They were of the privately controlled type and sold blocks of stock to the unions. All failed, entailing losses to the workers estimated at from $1 million to $2.5 million. The labor investment movement got well underway after 1922. It grew side by side with labor banking and the B&O plan. As usual in trade union capitalism generally, the B of LE is the most active union also in this phase. It controls 10 investment corporations with a combined capital of $27 million. It owns 2 great office buildings in Cleveland and for a time held a controlling interest in the $40 million Equitable Building in New York, long famous as the largest office building in the world, and located in the heart of the Wall Street financial district. It has heavy investments in banks, railroads, and various industries. Labor banks and investment companies put their money into all kinds of ventures, from building apartments to financing foreign loans. Trade union life insurance. An important form of trade union capitalism is trade union life insurance companies. Employees' group insurance stimulated this movement. The Portland 1923 and El Paso 1924 conventions of the AFL gave the first big impetus to this movement. Accordingly, a meeting of representatives of 50 international unions was held in the offices of the AFL in July 1925. The conference unanimously endorsed the plan of the unions going into the life insurance business. Out of this conference was born the Union Labor Life Insurance Company, capitalized at $600,000. Matthew Wool is its head. It is dominated by a clique of ultra-right-wing reactionaries who hold the majority of stock firmly in their control. A few socialists and progressives are drawn to the leading committees in an effort to give the organization a mass appeal. There are a couple more of such companies already in the field. The John Mitchell and the Union Cooperative Insurance Companies, the former specializing in insurance for miners and the latter for electrical workers. The railroad leaders proposed in 1925 to launch the American Endowment Corporation, to be headed by 9 prominent railroad union leaders. These, with a stranglehold on the company control, were to receive half of the profits. Apparently this scheme has collapsed. In organizing the trade union life insurance companies, the bureaucrats are dreaming of billions of dollars of petty investors, of which they hope to secure control. There are other great insurance companies totaling additional billions. In a word, the plan of the bureaucrats is to compete with them and to cut into their rich field of operations. Trade union life insurance, like other forms of trade union capitalism, works injuriously upon the labor organizations. It diverts their attention from the struggle and into capitalist enterprises. It poisons the organizations with an anti-working class ideology and subordinates them organizationally to capitalist institutions. It corrupts the leaders, enriches them, and makes them less and less responsible to rank-and-file interest and control. It is a menace to the labor movement. The higher strategy of labor. The class collaboration policies of the bureaucracy and the new orientation, the new American reformism, which is based upon cooperating with the employers to increase production and upon trade union capitalism, and which is a cessation of struggle against the capitalists, Professor Carver classifies as the higher strategy of labor. Apparently, according to him, the lower strategy of labor was when the labor leaders made at least some pretense at the defense of the workers' interests. The so-called higher strategy of labor was thus indicated by Warren S. Stone in The World's Work, November 1924. Organized labor in the United States has gone through 3 cycles. Some of the unions are still in the second. The first was the period during which class consciousness was being aroused. The second was the defensive struggle for the principle of collective bargaining. This was and is a period of warfare. The third cycle or phase lies in constructive development towards a system of cooperation rather than war, and the most striking evidence of this phase is the labor bank. The speeches of Green, Wool, and other prominent reactionary union leaders, which are re-echoed throughout the entire trade union press, are saturated with these same ideas, that the crude, primitive, warlike days of labor are past and gone, that henceforth the workers will progress through cooperation with the employers and by saving their money. At Harvard University, Green recently said, "The trade union movement has been passing through that period when physical controversies and the tactics of force were most effective. It is now in a period when its leaders must seek the conference room and there, by exposition and demonstration, convince conferees of the justice and wisdom of its position." Before the Taylor Society in New York, he said, "Labor realizes that the success of management means the success of labor. For that reason, labor is willing to make its contribution to assist management and to bring about the right solution of problems dealt with by management. The workers believe that through understanding and cooperation, the best interests of all those associated with industry can be served." In the New York Evening Post, January 3, 1927, he said, "Through our trade unions, we are helping the workers in industry to become investors, to carry insurance, to assume a responsible part in industry and community life. That is, teaching them to give up the fight, to accept the leadership and direction of the capitalists, and to be content with whatever few crumbs the latter may deign to throw them from their overloaded tables." Matthew Wool, chief spokesman of big capital in the trade unions, accepts Carver's term the higher strategy of labor, and thus defines it in a recent number of Iron Age. In its early struggles, labor sought to retard, to limit, to embarrass production to obtain that which it desired. Now it seeks the confidence that it is a preserver and a developer of an economic, industrial, and social order in which workers, employers, and the public may all benefit. The so-called higher strategy of labor plays into the hands of the employers at every point. It is an invaluable aid for their speed-up program. Already the workers are speeded to an impossible rate and the pace grows faster. Thus, in 1926, the productive output of railroad labor per man was 40% greater than in 1915 and 150% more than in 1890. In 1925, all production records of industry as a whole were broken, there being 6% more production than in 1923, yet the number of actual workers was less by 4.5% than in 1923 and 7% less than in 1919. Figures in 1926 will show similar tremendous speeding up. The bureaucrats, with their theory of higher wages being possible only by increasing production and their program of cooperation with the employers, are entirely in step with the latter's plan to exploit the workers to the limit. In 1926, the capitalists reaped enormous and in many cases unprecedented profits. The railroads, typical of many industries, gained a larger net income, $1,232,000,000, than ever before in its history. Except in the cases of skilled workers, in some industries, wages have not advanced materially. The leaders, with their anemic policy, have made no struggle to improve conditions. Often wage cuts have been suffered, as in textiles, shoes, etc. Even as I write this, the United Mine Workers, undermined and demoralized by the reactionary Lewis machine, are in a life-and-death fight against a cut in wages in the bituminous fields. Never did the workers receive a smaller portion of what they actually produce, and their share grows steadily less. In 1849, workers received 51% of the value added to raw materials during the process of manufacture. In 1889, this had declined to 45%, and in 1923 to 41%. The higher strategy of labor, with its policy of speed up and no struggle, will help sink this percentage still lower. The weak efforts of the leaders for the shorter workday and work week affect only the skilled trades and by no means offset the tremendous increases in efficiency of the workers, the chief advantage of which goes to the employers. The new orientation of the trade union leaders towards intensified class collaboration, Mr. Carver's higher strategy of labor, devitalizes the unions. Nothing is being done to organize the millions of unorganized, nor to consolidate the ranks of the antiquated craft unions. False illusions about the benefits of the capitalist system are instilled into the minds of the workers. Trade union capitalism brings the unions into poisonous contacts with the employers and still further corrupts the leaders. Nothing is done to break with the capitalist parties and to found a real party of labor. With a stagnant or declining membership in the strategic industries, the unions are not holding their own as against the employers. They are a diminishing factor in the life of the working class. More and more, the bureaucrats' tendency is to cast aside the strike as a weapon against the employers. Steadily, the number of strikes diminish. In 1926, there were fewer strikes than in any year since the wartime. The motto of the trade union leaders is not strikes against the employers, but cooperation with, surrender to, them. In the days when the unions still possessed some militancy, the conditions of organized workers always stood forth clearly as being far better than those of unorganized workers. But now, in many cases, union workers are employed under conditions little if any better than those of non-union workers. This is a deadly situation. The militant employers, with their Ford systems, mitten plans, welfare work, voluntary wage increases, etc., are claiming on all sides, with a maze of statistics, that in many instances they have established as good or better conditions in their industries than exist in industries controlled by the unions. The truth is, not that the soulless corporations are improving the conditions of the masses, but that the unions, with their corrupt and reactionary leadership and their hopelessly antiquated policies, are failing to make an effective fight, either for the masses at large or their own membership. Present-day intensified class collaboration stifles the fighting spirit of the unions and saps their vitality. A widespread lassitude and indifference among the workers toward the unions is one of the most pronounced and significant characteristics of the present situation in the labor movement. In the recent survey by the Pennsylvania Federation of Labor to find out what is the matter with the unions, 22 of 26 officials replying stated that the general state of indifference now existing among the membership is greater than ever before. Apologists for the bureaucracy have attempted to explain away this deadly indifference, this serious lowering of the organized workers' morale, by ascribing it to widespread prosperity among the workers, which they say makes a militant ideology and fighting policy impossible, to the popularization of motion pictures, the radio, and the automobile, which occupies the workers so that they do not attend meetings of their unions, to the growth of welfare systems in the industries, which tend to take away the fraternal features of the unions, etc., etc. But such reasons are in vain. The real cause is the declining role of the unions under the new orientation as fighting organizations. The leaders do nothing to stir the militant spirit and class enthusiasm of the workers. They fail to lead the unions in defense of the workers' interests. They resist every effort to develop the unions into organizations capable of coping with modern capitalism. They rigidly suppress all union democracy and poison the very class soul of the unions with capitalist economics. The widespread indifference of the workers toward the unions is an inevitable result of the prevailing intense class collaboration policies of the union officialdom. Even before the development of the new orientation, beginning about 1922, the unions suffered from the class collaborationism of the leadership. But now the situation is worse. The bureaucrats are compromising the unions on all fronts, ideological and organizational. They are not successfully defending the workers' interests now, nor are they educating and organizing the workers for the great class struggles which must come at the end of the present period of industrial activity. On the contrary, the top leaders are striving to degenerate the trade unions into company unions, with the help of and under the pressure from the employers. The great masses of workers, both organized and unorganized, live in hardship. They lack many of the real essentials of life, while on all sides they see the employers and their parasitic hangers-on rolling in wealth. They want better conditions, and they display many indications that they are willing to fight for them. But to a very large extent, their efforts to build real labor organizations and to wage aggressive struggles against the employers are defeated by the reactionary leaders who play the game of the bosses. The liquidation of such chloroforming arrangements as the so-called higher strategy of labor, the elaboration of a militant program of struggle, the modernizing of the trade unions organizationally and otherwise, the development of an honest and aggressive leadership, are vital and inevitable steps in overcoming the present slump in the labor movement. They are essential to give expression to the workers' discontent and desire for struggle and in the development of a fighting organization representative of the workers' interests and capable of defending their interests. 1927. That's the end of chapter 12. That was a long one. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you all for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. Have a good one, folks.